This is RFID, Decades at a Time, by Daniel Dobkin of Enigmatics, and Christopher Santia and Gregory Durgan, Georgia Tech. We'll start with Radio for ID, a brief history. We'll look back 20 years at the Auto ID labs. We'll think about where we are today. We'll try to look forward 10 and 20 years to where we might be, and talk about why it might be hard to get there. Radio for identification. Humans identify objects by sight. We need to be able to see the object and its distinguishing features, and for many millennia that was mostly that. Then came radio waves. Early work on identification, friend or foe, was occurring in the 1930s. The example here was using 200 megahertz. Lower frequencies were also explored. In 1948, Harry Stockman published work on sending audio signals using backscattered radio waves. In 1973, Charles Walton developed resonator keys that enabled you to open a door. In 1977, Coel and co-workers published work with passive tags with ID and temperature sensors for identifying cattle and other animals. In the 1980s, this technology was put into use under AAR's S918 for railcar identification in the United States. In 1990s, ISO 11784 and 11785 were used for identifying livestock and pets, although, as Mifune the cat shows, not all of the pets appreciated being radio identified. That led to the Auto ID vision. The vision was a unique electronic product code, or EPC, for every manufactured object. Access from production to disposal or recycling to that number. Simple, cheap tags that just carry the EPC. A markup language for objects in web databases, and provisions for accessing that information from anywhere. The path started in 1998 with the publication of the Electronic Product Code by Brock, Sarmas, Hu, and Nygren. In 1999, the Auto ID Center at MIT was founded. They later added associated work at Cambridge, Adelaide, Keio, Fujian, and St. Gallen. They worked with manufacturers to develop the Class 0 and Class 1 standards for reading tags. In 2003, this work was transferred to the EPC Global organization, which developed the Class 1 Gen 2 standard for tag information, which is still basically used today. In 2004, Yossi Sheffi of MIT published a work on the innovation cycle, which he regarded as consisting of the fog of innovation, life support for the existing, the stamp of approval, out with the old, it's everywhere, and the Big Bang. He felt that in 2004, RFID was in the stamp of approval phase, and that it might proceed further to other phases, but that data ownership issues may prevent complete sharing, and there are privacy concerns that may impede the free flow of information. With that said, let's look at RFID today. For context, the world in 2025. 1.2 billion phones were sold in 2024 for 8.2 billion people. Most of those have cameras for bar and QR codes and HF radios for near-field communications. Data centers, including artificial intelligence, consumed about 200 terawatt hours in the United States and 500 terawatt hours total in the world. That's about 2% of all the world's electricity, and it is growing very rapidly, as shown by this work from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories. With that, there are now 4 major methods of identifying things with a radio. Bar and QR codes, which precede radio. High-frequency HF RFID, where high frequency here is 13.56 megahertz. UHF, 18,000-63, which is basically class 1 Gen 2, around 900 megahertz, depending on what country you are in. And active beacons like Bluetooth Low Energy and Zigbee. Let's take a look at these. Barcodes and QR codes have huge volume and many different standards. They are image-based to read. They don't need a laser anymore, which is when people like me who don't have any hair and had hair at that point can still remember. That works with a phone camera. The QR capacity is okay for a unique ID, but it's awkward to print a unique ID for every single object. So typically, these identify a product type or a web location, which may look like a lot more fun than this talk. Near-field communications at 13.56 megahertz is typically magnetically coupled using a card or a phone with an inductive antenna inside, as shown here. These are widely used for payments under ISO 14443 or 15693. About 5 billion of these were sold in 2024. Typically, the read range is on the order of 10 centimeters. And that's a good thing. That's the key to applications where people don't want things to be read from far away. Ultra-high frequency RFID is a far-field transmission, which is then backscattered by the tag in most cases, as shown here. The ID is hopefully unique, although that's not always the case. It operates under ISO 18000-6C, which became ISO 18000-63. And incidentally, EPC Gen 2 version 3 was recently released, which adds some lower power commands and a combination select and query command. Read range has gotten up to tens of meters, although if you look at the graph carefully, you can see it's taken a long time to do that. This is widely used in apparel, in retail, in warehouse management. About 50 billion tags were sold in 2024. Active beacons typically include Bluetooth and Zigbee running at 2.4 gigahertz. The beacons periodically transmit information and then be quiet to save energy. Such standards as iBeacon and Eddystone are used to define what's on the beacon. They have ranges of tens of meters, and they're used for proximity marketing, for asset tracking, to find items, to track patients. Battery months to years endurance. $10 for one of these things, hundreds of millions, we think, were sold in 2024. So what we have is market segmentation. We have barcodes that tell what a type of object is. We have QR codes that point to a location on the web. We have high-frequency RFID that points to an instance of a human, or at least their bank account. UHF RFID that identifies uniquely an object and its instance. Bluetooth, which locates the object or possibly locates the viewer. UHF RFID did not get to out with the old. Instead, each technology has its own niche. There's no universal ID. And now, so what happens next? Let's look at RFID a decade away. The next big bump in UHF RFID may be in enterprise phones, possibly in 2026. Qualcomm, for example, has said the integration of RAIN RFID technology into mobile devices is rapidly progressing, with initial rollouts focusing on enterprise mobile devices expected within a few quarters. From Eileen Ryan, courtesy of Juho Partanen. If that happens, we could expect wide use in retail. It may supplement, though not replace, QR codes and barcodes. It'll help with finding and tracking things. But you do need a short-range mode because people expect to read close up and not 3 or 4 or 5 meters away. It can also be used as a history tool for repair and maintenance of objects, something that is currently done with airplane parts today. Perishability. Tags on perishable items may also have a freshness sensor, and they can give you a database for the expiration data, the nutritional information, the country of origin, all kinds of useful stuff that you might want to know about something you might think about eating.
There'll never be goodbye.
The circular world, which we saw before, is assisted by the capability of identifying objects. In the European Union, the digital product passport, whose implementation is proceeding through around 2030, already allows for RFID tags to be used in some applications. We have to provide a unique identification under ISO 15459, and ideally there will be regulated information accessed, possibly using decentralized blockchain technology. But we can also use RFID for seeing in complex places. Now we're beginning to speculate, incidentally. In the real world, metal and water and folks are often in the way. So it's interesting to think about, for example, using multiple in, multiple out, that is, many transmit and receive antennas with artificial intelligence to help us figure out how to look at every place in a large area. The data shown here is from a 2019 publication by Wang et al., showing that with many, many beamforming vectors, you could read a very large area and get about 97% of the tags. You might also be able to do simultaneous reads in different regions, just as you would with separate antennas, but with the ability to redefine where the regions are. This could be very useful in warehouses, conveyors, and recycling. It's also interesting to think about using harmonics to detect below the minimum power at which a tag can turn on, and then watch the harmonics and use those to adjust your beamforming technology so you can turn a tag on that otherwise you wouldn't see. Again, speculating about seeing complex places, a lot of work has been done on ambient radiation backscatter using TV, radio, Wi-Fi, cellular waves, and sending complex signals, for example, Bluetooth Low Energy. We also think that tunnel diodes may play an important role for complex modulations, since they don't take much energy and can do some crazy complicated things. Perhaps leading to, again speculating, everything tags that support UHF, NFC, Bluetooth Low Energy, harmonics, all kinds of stuff, with a shared EPC, albeit possibly with settings that allow them to talk only to one different type of technology at certain times. This is virtually unreal? Well, you thought that was augmented. How about way, way out? First of all, expectorating spectra. The traditional regulatory model for spectrum has been licensed and unlicensed but constrained use, and ultra-wideband. Shown here roughly, that is, specific frequencies are allocated to specific purposes in specific places. But with AI, maybe we could just use wavelength when it's free and change when we need to. The use of the virtual world in informing humans might enable your phone to support virtual reality. With a unique ID, you have the world at depth. You know what everything is. You see everything everywhere all at once, which you should see if you haven't. It's a very interesting film. And we'll point out that we're ignoring all the obstacles, so let's look at them. Radio networks. Radio knowledge comes from lots of different bands with different local regulations, radiation behavior, effective range, and environmental response. And the owners of bandwidth benefit from that bandwidth, and they will not give it up for free. And when do we stop fitting everything on one phone? Just incidentally. Data ownership. Each vendor has an incentive to keep information private. Rules differ in different jurisdictions. The public can help with this, but then they infringe on their own privacy. If everything's identified after it's sold, every human carries a detailed history which can lead to theft and embarrassment and deceptive selling. They might want to keep things secret. We need agreement on what is disclosed, when, and why. And finally, when everything's identified with remote resources, what happens when those resources go away? Well, glad that's over with. We're on a path to a complex radio-identified world that has good and bad consequences. We should envision what can go wrong. We should communicate with the public. And you should keep up, not like me. Thanks to Rich Marshall, Juho Parttinen, the Georgia Tech Propagation Group, and the backgrounds were by Nicholas Dobkin of Dentetsu Creative, LLC. That's all, folks.